Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. So today I'm going to show you guys how you can repair a boot because I had a little whoopsie. I got stepped on by a horse and my foot is fine, but my boot is not. Now I assume when the boot was made, it was originally made with cotton threads. Now, I do not advocate for using cotton threads in any of my leather work because cotton has a tendency to rot, especially when it's exposed to weather and salts and acids and all different kinds of stuff that you don't know what you're walking through. So I'm going to show you guys how you can repair your boot. I don't have enough funds to buy myself a new pair at the moment, and these are just perfectly fine, just as long as I can sew that back together. All the holes look great, so it's just the threads that I need to replace today. So I'm going to show you guys how you can repair your boot after you have something like this happen. Now first off, you want to make sure you wash your boot with warm water. So here I've got a rag that's full of warm water, and I'm going to go ahead and just use that on my boot. Now the warm water is going to act as a loosening agent. Well, it kind of helps loosen the pores of the leather, just kind of like it does when you wash your face and you use hot water on your face. Same thing, it helps open the pores up, and it will make the leather more stretchy just a little bit. And that is also going to help when I go ahead and reopen these holes so that they don't break, but they'll just kind of give a little bit. So that's something you're going to want to make sure you have on hand. Wash your boot, make sure you have warm water in a rag. You are definitely going to need a sewing kit. You're going to need 2 needles, especially for this kind of a project. And you're going to need a nylon thread. Now this is basically a saddlery thread. So it's going to be really, really strong. It's not going to break easily, and it won't rot. So it's weatherproof that way. You are going to need a good pair of scissors that are very, very sharp because you don't want your ends of your threads to fray as you're using them. You are going to need a lighter, and you are going to need a good pair of tweezers. So let's get started, shall we? Now I did find these tools, I might as well say this now, but I found these on, or actually at my dollar store. So I'm really excited to give this a try. I'm liking how this needle point is the same width. Actually, it's an awl. There's 2 of them. Might as well just unpackage these right now. I have not used these, so I have no idea how this is going to work. But it looks like that's got a consistent width all the way through, so that's going to help me make sure that I can line my holes up and not overstretch them, because this is a really tiny hole, and I don't want to have something that gets wider like this one does towards the base, because I'm going to have to punch through both the top layer and the bottom layer of my leather. So I'm going to give these a try, so we'll find out if these dollar store tools work as well as I'm hoping they do. They look like they're going to be just fine. So I'm going to take my tweezers first thing, and I'm going to have to start pulling out all of the old threads. So that's first up. And when you hand sew your leatherwork back together, or your boots, whatever you're sewing, using something that's not a sewing machine stitch is awesome, because sewing machine, when you pull on a thread, it's going to come out like, it's going to have the whole thing just come right out here. And let me, if I pull on this, maybe this will do that. Yep, see? Pulled several holes out all at once. Pinch, and they all come out. So I do not like using a sewing machine on my leather work either. I definitely do it by hand, because once I loop that thread on the leather, it's going to stay in the leather. It's not going to pull out in a large string like this one just did. So I want to make sure I can pull all of those out, and having a good set of tweezers is definitely useful. Alright, that's looking fairly good. I have to keep going here. That one I don't know if I can get all of the old thread out of, but we'll give it a go. I'm only going to go so far because I don't want to get ahead of myself in my working. So some of those spots where they have the holes marked, I'm going to just leave them and only going to start over here. I like going from left to right when I do my hand sewing, so might as well do the left side of my boot and then work my way over to the right side. But I got to pull all of these out of there. Alright, so that's fairly good. I'm pretty happy with that at the moment. Now, I have to line up my old stitch, where that hole is right there. I'm going to punch that through. And I'm going to line it up with the hole underneath of it. So right about right there, it looks like. All right, I'm pleased with that. Okay, yes, I am excited. This tool works. All right, so now that I've got my first hole marked, I'm gonna go ahead and start marking just a couple more. I think I'll probably mark 4 from there. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. I only like to go a certain ways ahead and not get ahead of myself, because as I work, sometimes those holes like to close back up. And so only just doing a few at a time really makes that better, so that way you don't have to redo what you've already done. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. There we go. I've got those holes marked. Now I'm going to have to thread up my needles and get ready to get those started, so I'll be back here in a few minutes. Alright, so this is the saddle stitch. Now it's going to be a little bit tricky because we have to work with 2 needles. So I've threaded 1 needle on my thread. It's kind of just free hanging out there. And I've got my other needle that is having the thread kind of looped in half, and then both ends are coming through the eye of that needle. Now the reason I did this is because my thread is so thin, I don't want it to break, so I cannot use my normal method of being able to secure my needles, because again, the holes are small. I don't want knots to catch on them, and again, I don't want my thread to break or anything like that either. So I've got a little bit of a challenge to work through, but this is still the saddle stitch. You're still going to need to know this stitch. If you haven't seen my earlier videos on using saddle stitching and different methods of sewing, then you will definitely want to watch that. So first thing I'm going to do is take my needle and line up the holes and stick it in there. Now I want to make sure that it's just kind of free floating. It's not hung up on anything. It's not embedded in the foot or the pad of my boot, so I'm not going to end up sticking my foot in there and accidentally pricking myself on a tip of a needle somewhere. You know, you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that your needle can move. Now the next thing I do is I take my hand on the inside of my boot. I'm just going to slide it gently and feel where that needle is with my fingertip. This is going to make sure that if I'm blind, I can't see what's going on, I don't accidentally stab myself trying to find where that needle is. So my hand goes on the inside of the boot, I feel where the needle is, and then I pull it through. But don't lose your needle. You don't want to have to go fishing for it in a spot where you can't see. So I've got my hand already inside there. I hope you can see where my finger is. Yeah, you can. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and very gently feel for that needle. There it is. I can wiggle it. I can move it around. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it through very, very carefully. Now I'm going to go ahead and keep hold of that needle. Now one of the things that I like to do is I start from the back. So this is just going to secure my needle for right now. So I've got coming back up through here. And I'm going to go ahead and just come out. I've got to still go through my next hole here. And there I have completed 1 stitch. Now I like starting from back to front, because that way when I come up, there's nothing in that hole already, so there's nothing going to impede in any way or restrict my ability to come up through that hole when I'm blind. I can't really see what I'm doing. like I can when I'm working from the top. So here's my top needle, because it's the one that's furthest to the back. See, here's my top needle. I'm going to set my inside boot needle to the side, because I don't need it for right now. We'll just kind of match those threads up and kind of find my middle point. There we go. That's good. Alright, so I'm going to set my inside boot needle away. Going to take this needle and go in through the same hole. Now you want to make sure that you pull the threads out of the way. You don't want to catch anything. You want to make sure everything's nice and tight and secure. And I'm going to go ahead and stick my needle in there and go front to back. There you go. Take my hand inside of my boot, find that needle, there it is. And I've completed one whole stitch. Now I'm going to go back to front as soon as I can find that hole. Now see, this is why I like to make sure nothing is in my way, because coming up is so hard. Since you can't see where anything is, you kind of have to guess and check a little bit. And that looks about right. There's my needle right there. I'm going to go ahead and come up. I hope you guys can see this okay. Going to come up, take my next hole right there. So front to back is now completed. I can set that needle aside and go front to back through that same one that I just came up. Pull the threads nice and tight and just gently but surely stick it back in there. There we go. So this is how we're going to sew up the boot using the saddle stitch. This makes it look like one continual stitch, like a sewing machine, but it's not. It's actually definitely better. So I'll show you again. Back to front. Come on, where is it? Sometimes if I have trouble going through there, I'll just take my awl and just kind of punch through, and then I can feel with my finger where that tip is, and then I can line the tip of my needle up with my awl, and sometimes that helps as a guide as well. Alright, so back to front. Here we go. Set this needle aside and go front to back. So this is the method for doing a saddle stitch, especially for repairing a boot where one spot of your leather work you're going to be working blind and you have to go by feel. So we'll be back when I need to change threads, and I'll show you guys how I do that, finish up one thread and then start a new one in a bit. Now this is time consuming, so be prepared that if you're going to be sewing up a boot, prepare to be there for a while. Alright, we'll be back in a little bit. Alright, so I've got a pretty fair distance. I've got all this outside sewn to right about this corner. Now I have found that sewing protrusion areas like this corner here and coming over to this corner here tend to be a little bit easier to sew, but the little coves, these little indentations, are a little bit trickier, so you want to be careful with that. Now, I did learn that this tool is great for re-widening holes that already exist in leather, but if you want to purchase this tool to puncture leather, this is not going to work. This little tool will bend. So, thought I'd mention that. So my threads are a little bit short, and I can tell because I don't really have a whole lot of room to hook my needle over the top of the boot, of my inside boot needle. So I am going to start a new thread. So I'm going to take my inside boot needle, and I am going to do just a little hole right through the leather, Well, the hole's already there. Just gonna have to re-widen it. So put that hole there. Then take my needle, and this is a little bit trickier to do. My leather's drying out, so I really need to add some more warm water to it to make it a little bit softer. But I'm only going to go halfway. Now I'm using this to kind of help be my needle guide a little bit, so that does help sometimes. There we go. Got my needle through there. There it is. Gonna go ahead and pull it out. Now I'm gonna leave it this way, so I've only sewn the bottom piece of my leather. I'm going to take my needle that's on top, and I'm going to make a half stitch down and out through the sides like that. So now, if I remove my needles, I actually have thread coming out between the two layers of leather. That's going to allow me to make a little knot just like so, and that's going to be tucked away. It's not going to be rubbed on anything. It's going to be safe and secure underneath the two pieces of leather. And then I will thread my needles and start over just like I did with this hole down here. I'm going to start again in that same area where I just left off. Okay, so something that I forgot to mention, and it's a safety reason, so I should mention it now. I like to make sure that I can always pull my needle all the way out of my boot. So no matter how long it is or appears to be out here, if I can't hook my needle on this area here because my threads are too short, that's when I go ahead and cut it. I want to make sure I can always pull my needle out the top of my boot. Otherwise, if I'm dealing with a shorter thread and say my needle is here and then I have to turn around, that thread can actually tug the needle back out of your hands and you can get stabbed. So we don't want that. It's a safety thing. So you want to make sure you can see your needle, pull it all the way out of your boot when you can. And when it gets to be about this long and you don't have room enough to hook your needle on the top of your boot, that's when you go ahead and change your threads. So I thought I should mention that as just a basic rule of thumb to always do. Now I've got my needle already rethreaded back up, and I'm going to go ahead and start like I did back here. So I'm going to go ahead and find that very last hole that I just came out of that I finished off and tied. So I'm going to go down with this needle. So now this is going to be my inside boot needle. I'm going to pull it through the leather. And I definitely need to re-wet my boot to continue sewing. Now I'm going to go back to front. I'm going to make sure I've got no holes, no loops, that's left undone, because if I have a loop like this underneath my boot, I can actually get my toe caught on that and it'll cut the threads and then you have to start over. So that's not any fun at all. So make sure that you have all of those tucked away between the layers of the leather if you are at a point where you can do that. But make sure everything's nice and snug. I'm going to match up both my needles, pull my thread. So that's the middle point in my thread. Now I'm going to take my outside boot needle and go front to back. Now I'll continue the same method, back to front, front to back, until I'm completely either out of thread or I'm completely done with my sewing project. So we'll be back as soon as I am done completing all the rest of this sewing. So we'll be back. Alright, so we're coming to the very last of the sewing. So I've already pulled my inside boot needle out, so I've got it just kind of tucked in between the two pieces of leather. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the top. So top to the middle. I'm going to come out the side just like that. Pull my needle through. I'm going to go ahead and cut my threads because I no longer need my needle. I'm going to tuck it safely away. A little sewing kit here. You guys watched me do a little demo video on this. This has been an excellent kit for me. Alright, now we just need to tie the threads. And that's going to make sure that the knot stays in between the two pieces of leather. It'll be protected, it's tucked away, nothing's going to happen to it. Now we come to the final little bit. Now what's awesome is this is nylon thread. Nylon melts. So what we're going to do is just melt those ends right back. Just like that. Now it's tucked away and it's not going to go anywhere. I'm going to do the same thing here. Cut my tails. Take my lighter. I'm going to very gently just melt the ends of those back. That's going to get all tucked away. It's not going to get lost anywhere. There we go. Now we got the one last to do here on the toe. Going to cut the threads. I don't need to leave them that long, but I did. Just going to go ahead and melt those back. And there we go. I hope you enjoyed this video, and this is how you can repair your own boots. And if you enjoyed it, come back for more adventures and videos later on. Bye now.